cyber wars are on. They've been on for a while. Uh, they tend to go at sort of a slow boil because of the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all these different economies. Nation states don't want to push it too far because, hey, we're trading partners as well. But nonetheless, it's a point of leverage. There's no question about that.
The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Solar Podcast, cybersecurity and communication protocols in solar. My guest today is Tom Tansy, the Executive Director and Chairman of SunSpec Alliance. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Tim. Happy to be here.
Really pleased to have such a legendary organization on the show. I know about SunSpec uh, because of rapid shutdown, but you're involved in so many things. So we're going to give our audience a quick overview of some of those things, but then really take a deep dive into cybersecurity and communications, which are fast evolving. And as we know, so important, right? Our power
Right.
infrastructure is vital infrastructure and it needs to be secure. So really looking forward to this conversation. Give our listeners some background on yourself, Tom. How did you come to the solar industry?
Sure. Well, happy to. Yeah. Well, first of all, I got started with the SunSpec Alliance a little over 11 years ago now is when I founded the organization. Prior to that, I've been in Silicon Valley for most of my adult life and have taken on a number of startup companies, started a number of companies involved in all manner and class of things. Enterprise middleware, data communications is really my expertise. Along the way, of course, I tried other things as well. Worked in cybersecurity with in the PC and again enterprise middleware space. And then about 11 years ago, I decided that really I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful, that to be impactful to the planet. Not that participating in the computer revolution didn't scratch that itch, but again, it was just time to do something different here, and I really had a burning desire to get into renewables, and so I tried a few different things along the way. Helped do some fundraising for a wind turbines that were attached to effectively blimps. That was one operation that I helped sort out that business plan. Another successful one, Zero Motorcycles, electric motorcycle company. I helped get that company started. Ultimately, though, it took me a while to figure out solar and photovoltaics really is kind of where it's at, because, of course, electricity is the most fungible form of power that we have. It can be used for many different purposes. And it just really made sense to me that sun shines every day. And this is an electronic product, which I understood electronics very well. I thought, yeah, this is where I like to spend my time for the last third of my career. And so that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, I love geeking out on technology. And I think I saw some news about that wind turbines on blimps. There was also a wind turbine company that was trying to do like a platform that would kite,
Absolutely.
at like 30,000 feet where the
Right.
wind blows constantly at 100 miles an hour.
It has
Um,
great benefits in those regards. The
yeah,
problem, of course, it takes some long cables to get back to Earth.
right.
That's the
Yes, long,
problem.
expensive cables.
That's right.
And sighting those things probably isn't the easiest either
Not
because
That's true, right? Not
you
versus solar, you can put it up anywhere,
well, not anywhere, but most anywhere.
most anywhere. Yes,
And that is
where you're
that,
allowed to.
you know, we I think we have a lot in common. The threads that connect my careers are technology, sustainability, and people, really.
Right.
And that's why I love solar. It connects all of those things, and it's a fast moving tech world, right? The technology is always evolving, whether it's the panels themselves or the inverters or the racking or the communications, right? So it's
Right.
there's always something new to learn, and I'm a
Mhm.
lifelong learner and I love learning. So
Mhm.
we'll tell our listeners about the alliance. What was this? What was the ideation behind the
Sure.
alliance, and what are your core offerings today?
Pretty simple start, and actually it ties in, I think, pretty well to our topic today. So I had connected with a company called Fat Spaniel back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. And we're involved in solar system monitoring at our peak prior to being acquired by Power One, which then became ABB. We had about 5,000 systems under our management. And I was running the operation, both the engineering and business development operation. And what I noted is that with almost every new deal that we were bringing in, we're having to do some customization to write some driver for an inverter, for a meter, what have you. And so, I went to the dev shop and said, hey, what's the deal here? Why are we doing all this customization for all this componentry? All the component parts, they all seem like they're relatively interchangeable. We seem to work with a lot of them. So what could be the issue? And so what my lead developer told me is that, yeah, they're all very similar, but they're all different enough to cause us to do this special work. And so I said, well, wait a minute here. So we were able to standardize how computers talk to printers. Those things start off being all different. So couldn't we have a similar situation here? And the answer came back, yeah, we probably could. So that was the original thought. And then since we were working with the broad supply chain, I asked probably 20 companies that would they be interested to get together and starting up a standard. And 16 of them said yes, because they have the same problems that we did. Every time they had a sale, they had to wait to do some customization. And so from 16 companies wanting to develop a common inverter driver interface to today, we have about 125, 130 members working in the Alliance. And across a variety of technologies. Our original technologies was SunSpec Modbus, which is now part of the IEEE 1547 national standard. But we also work in the IEEE 2030.5 protocol arena, another IEEE 1547 mandated standard. DNP3, which those of you that are involved in utility scale development will recognize that. That's the third IEEE 1547 standard, all of which are subject to cybersecurity considerations. We're also involved in the rapid shutdown standard. We developed that from scratch for safety for solar modules. We also have the orange button standard, which we have co-developed with with a few hundred different partners under a contract with the Department of Energy. And that standard is used for the purpose of application data interchange, specifically for supporting finance. And then, of course, as time has evolved here, also the operation of these systems. And so different people in the industry know SunSpec for different reasons. And so this is always a bit of a challenge when people say, well, what the heck do you do? It's like, well, we develop information standards for distributed energy. And we feel that if we can connect all these things top to bottom, that leads to the best effect in terms of driving down cost and driving up innovation.
Excellent. And so, well, let's just get into it. Cybersecurity is in the news. What is it? The solar wind
Right,
fiasco, right? With the
right,
US
right.
government being hacked by we think the Russians, has
Some nation state.
nothing to do with the solar industry per se. They just
Mhm.
gave it that name. I don't know why, but
What's the
um,
name of the company, actually?
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Company that makes the software that got hacked that
Right,
then got into all of the systems.
right,
Um, but and then you hear stories of both US government and other governments, that are hacking power systems.
right,
We've attacked the Iranians using cybersecurity hacks. The Russians have attacked the Ukrainians and
right.
shut their grid down remotely. And, there's some really scary things. And then you hear various and sundry experts talking about how fragile our grid is
Mhm.
to cyber hacks. And then, of course, just the grid is fragile. We're we're recording this on
Right.
the tail of the Texas grid collapse,
Yes.
which happened last week,
Mhm.
and is truly a natural disaster for our second largest state.
Right.
And um, it's
Also,
just
you have the story coming out about the water company getting hacked recently. So yeah, it's all over the news for sure. And so don't mean to alarm our audience, but just a matter of information. Yeah, the cyber wars are on. They've been on for a while. Uh, they tend to go at sort of a slow boil because of the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all these different economies. Nation states don't want to push it too far because, hey, we're trading partners as well. But nonetheless, it's a point of leverage. There's no question about that. And critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, is probably a very enticing, important target for a nation state adversary. And I think it also has the characteristic of the energy business of being really the last bastion that has not been totally overtaken by the internet. And again, because it's such a big, important system, there's natural conservatism that's built in. And in the past, because the energy grid has been highly centralized, the need for internet style connectivity has not been quite as great. However, with the popularity of distributed energy, so-called, some people call it distributed generation, the IEEE 1547 standard, the US national standard, calls it distributed energy resources. So that means any solar system or wind system or any sort of a spinning type of a generator that attaches to the distribution grid, energy storage, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. These things can all be in some ways considered to be DER. And these DER, as of, there are, as is it's implied in the name, they're distributed, they're everywhere. There's millions of these types of systems out there. And so with this latest turn of the 1547 standard, communications were brought in as a natural feature that would be required in order to manage, maintain, and control these types of systems. And so therefore, we're entering the internet age for energy with the passage of this regulation.
Yep. And it's a both and, right? You want the systems to be islanded from the internet so they're less vulnerable.
Right?
Um, but at the same time, you want to be able to communicate with them and know what's going on and update the software and
Right?
control the assets, turn
Right?
them off if there's an emergency.
Mhm.
Um, and have good information about what's necessary for O&M if anything. And so it's a very challenge, it's a big challenge. Just thinking about it, and I'm no expert on
Mhm.
renewable energy communication, but it strikes me uh as quite a puzzle. So
Right?
just at a very high level, how do you approach that problem of avoiding or minimizing risk
Uh-huh.
of a hack,
Right?
but making it functional for the various and sundry authorities, including the asset owner and the
Sure.
AHJ or the grid operator, to have access to what's going on the grid?
Yeah. Great question. And the answer is you address those types of challenges, but by first of all, developing competent standards that recognize the risk and recognize the domain for what it is. And then secondly, the application of those standards in practice. Somewhere in the midst there, policymakers need to get things right to then pick from amongst the available standards to determine what to recommend and or to mandate. And so I'd say, fortunately, with the IEEE 1547 standard, we have sort of all those elements at play. Proper orientation of the standards so that they can be cyber secured, proper orientation of the industry to look at security for what it is, something that's easier managed and implemented if it's designed in and built from the ground up. And then ultimately, it's the application of these technologies in the field that's going to make a difference. And we're now at the stage where we're starting to apply these technologies in the field, which is why I think we're having this conversation now, is that it's coming out of the research lab, it's passed into and through the regulatory framework, and now it's hitting the installers and the operators and the asset owners in real time in terms of their responsibility to deploy it going forward. So it's great that all this spade work has been done to set the system up. But now the real challenge begins, because now a large number of humans get involved and to deploy these types of systems on a very broad scale. So that's the next big hurdle that we have, is just to make sure that people are forewarned and armed with the right information to understand their responsibilities and to really understand how best to again, to apply these systems and to know their specific role in this very large collective effort of making sure that our nation's infrastructure is secured.
And of course, you know, these standards also impact ROI for the asset owner,
Sure.
and that is, you know, oftentimes front and center for us EPCs and installers when we're working with project owners or portfolio owners.
Hmm.
You know, the thing about uh, remote control, so to speak, of solar assets, for example, you know,
Right.
the grid operator wants to be able to potentially dial down um, the solar in the middle of the day if the grid is just, you know, has a plethora of energy on it.
Right.
But that also has an impact on the project owners directly, you
Yeah.
know.
How many electrons you generate, and therefore how much energy you're producing. Right.
Yep.
All
So
true.
you mentioned IEEE 1547. Can you give us a high level on that? What is that, and what is
Sure.
the goal of that?
Sure. History lesson. Bush administration, 2005, the Energy Policy Act was passed. It stipulated this IEEE 1547 regulation would become the defining standard for equipment in the space and was required across all 50 states. Now, given how our system of government works, of course, we have federal standards and we have state standards. And so as the federal standard is rolled out, then this 1547 standard needs to get built into state interconnection regulations, which it has over that period of time. And so that's where it started. That standard has been upgraded and enhanced over time to deal with the different challenges. The most recent upgrade or update to it, which became ratified in 2018, was motivated by the fact that distributed energy resources were becoming very popular, and that the prior implementation of that standard, the 1547 standard, would say that when you have very high penetration, in other words, high concentration of distributed energy in the grid, and that when the systems would go outside of their operating norms for voltage and frequency, that they would immediately trip off. And so, and that was the original consideration for that decision to make them trip off was for safety. And in the early going, when the safety consideration was local, that was a good decision. When you have high concentrations of solar energy in a given region, however, that tripping behavior becomes unsafe at a higher level, a regional level, because what it means is that if you have a series of these systems that trip off and they're all in the same circuit, you could have grid and disturbances, which could mean that the larger portion of the operating grid could become at risk of going dark. And so the standard was changed to loosen up those tolerances of when the tripping behavior would occur, also to standardize and codify how voltage and frequency was managed, how reactive power was managed, how curtailment is done, and things of that nature. So that when what would need to happen, it could be done in a uniform way, and thus we could turn these distributed energy resources into a real asset to help strengthen the grid, as opposed to what they were under the prior regime, which is a potential liability. Well, that's a little bit of a background about where that, about why the motivation why is to have a more resilient, more flexible grid. Now, as part and parcel of that, data communication got entered into the mix as well, because once you have these types of controls and capabilities, for the most part, you want these systems to run autonomously, and they do, and the standard is very well oriented there. But you may also want to manipulate and change your settings, either on an emergency basis or say on a seasonal basis, where you have different usage patterns and different impacts on the grid, either where you have more draw or more resources, et cetera. Uh, Now, a nice side benefit of these key capabilities, these controls and the data communication, it also means now that if you have storage on site, that, for example, instead of what you may have had to do before, which is curtail, now you can, of course, steer energy to the battery to do recharging. You can also take advantage of looking at these different signals to decide when to export, when to store, when to participate in some third market. All these things become possible with the standardized communication platform.
And is 1547 directly involved in that as well, that solar and storage communication piece?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Okay.
distributed energy resources, again, include energy storage, and not to get too technical here, but we operate across all four quadrants of power conversion, so we can sync to or source power. And yes, and so storage definitely is part of the definition.
Yeah. So what is, how does the rubber meet the road here, Tom?
Sure.
What do developers and installers need to know about? You had mentioned um, in the pre-show that the standards are evolving,
Hmm.
and we've all seen, of course, like rapid shutdown got widely adopted with NEC 2017,
Right.
and and although there are many jurisdictions that still aren't on NEC 2017,
Hmm.
eventually they will. and
Yeah, we're up to
it's
34 states now.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And so eventually, it will be universal.
Yeah.
But what's going on the communication side that developers and installers need to pay attention to?
Very similar story on the IEEE 1547 or the interconnection side. And so the IEEE 1547 2018 functional requirements became mandatory for implementation in 2020, oddly. But the reason why is that the test procedure, IEEE 1547.1, was ratified in 2020. And so that's the triggering action for all 50 states to start the adoption process. And so as in the United States, of course, the early growth for solar was concentrated in California and Hawaii. Hawaii very quickly went to a near saturated grid. And so they are the very first state to have codified the IEEE 1547 2018 into their interconnection rules. California is in the advanced stages of doing the same thing, as are Maryland and a number of other jurisdictions. And I believe in total there's about maybe half a dozen jurisdictions that are currently contemplating or planning to implement this standard. And within a period of 18 to 24 months, all 50 states will have to weigh in on this, either directly or tacitly by staying silent on it. They'll become bound by these IEEE 1547 2018 requirements. And so what goes along with that is for the local jurisdictions, it's determining about how they deal with this communication issue and therefore cybersecurity. In the California jurisdiction, what they decided to do is to define a default communication mechanism. They chose the IEEE 2030.5 standard, which we believe is a very good choice for handling system to utility operator data communication and security. And so what this means, every system, large and small, from CNI down to the smallest resi system, must communicate using this protocol for the most part, unless there's some mutual agreement. But 99% of them are going to go on to this type of communication system. And so it becomes part of the interconnection process. It means when you go to spark your system up for the very first time, you get a commissioning test on your datacom as well. And then we roll forward with that, with where we have a symbiotic relationship with the utility, where they ask us to do things. When I say they, the utility tells the system to do certain things. The system itself has for the most part, it must comply, but it has some options, as we say, to steer energy to charging a car, to taking care of topping up a battery and or supporting the grid as it may be required in those jurisdictions. So these types of rules will be written across the various public utility commissions. And so that standard IEEE 2030.5 is one that your audience will want to become familiar with. Now, the 1547 standard also includes SunSpec Modbus and, as I said, DNP3. And so well, first of all, about all those protocols, SunSpec has had a hand in shaping them all, and we offer a testing and certification program for all those protocols because, again, they're all really sort of cut out of the same cloth. The 2030.5 system was directly influenced by the SunSpec Modbus system, and then those lessons were applied to DNP3 as well. But back to SunSpec Modbus. So first of all, SunSpec Modbus, what that means is we use standard Modbus and we put SunSpec information models over the top of that. So Modbus is something your audience is very familiar with. SunSpec Modbus, what it defines a standard mapping of those IEEE 1547 functions to the protocols. That mapping is identical to the 2030.5 system. And so as Modbus is used for the local field network and 2030.5 is used for the system to utility network, these two things pair very well together. So you will see common gateways, I think, that will support SunSpec Modbus at the field bus to 2030.5 or to DNP3 to go over the wide area network. So that's a little picture, I think, about how the technology will roll out. Already we have tested and certified some 60 different component manufacturers. And over the course of the next 18 months, we think probably upwards of 80% of the market will adopt SunSpec Modbus, and then that will be paired with one of these other downstream protocols. So that's, again, sort of the standard substrate that you'll be dealing with from a data communication.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as this is mostly relevant for the manufacturers.
Correct.
And
In
then,
the short term.
yeah.
Yeah, it's relevant to the manufacturers to the point until the box gets shipped out into the field, and then the installer goes, "What? What do I do?" And so we're trying to get ahead of that what reaction to help educate people to know what's coming.
Well, and for us to have clear labeling and identification of the products about what products are compliant and which are not,
That's right.
that's why we lean so heavily on UL certification, for example,
Right.
because it's just plain as day. Either you have it or you don't.
Right.
I mean, unless you're a total crook and you're lying about it. But
Well, and well, you also have to pull the wool over the eyes of the local inspector, right? I mean, they know, just like you, they rely on the same cues that you do to know what's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and understanding UL marking, that's a good start. However, the world just got significantly more complicated, right? Because of the sort of uh, the specific jurisdictional requirements that you'll see. And so they first of all got more complicated for the manufacturer who needs to understand, well, do I tune this system up so that it works well in Hawaii, in California, in Maryland, New Jersey, et cetera? And then again, likewise within the supply chain, right? Making sure that you're getting the right products and that they have the ability to either be pre-configured or field configured for your local jurisdiction, so they'll meet those local requirements. Because again, Hawaii requirements and California requirements, they're very similar, but in terms of settings changes or the feature options that they may use within the standard, those things can vary depending upon what somebody's trying to do. Like Hawaii, for example, since it's an island grid, their main consideration is around frequency regulation. Over here in the mainland, we're mostly considered about voltage, and voltage tends to be a local thing. So depending upon how much solar you have, and so again, state to state, things can vary. And then likewise, the overlay of the communications and then the controls around those communications and security becomes second, third, and fourth consideration, which means that the information about these components is going to become a lot more rich because it's going to be needed for product selection.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's circle back though
Mhm.
to kind of the basic question about
Sure.
cybersecurity
Hmm.
and what is the state of the art, and you know, how secure are DG facilities in the greater scheme of things?
Uh, as we stand today,
Yeah, as we stand today and as we will stand, you know, in the near future as
uh-huh,
these better protocols get rolled out.
sure. As things stand today, so well, first of all, security is a risk reward business, right? So you need to identify your risks and you need to put in adequate protections. Otherwise, you're going to break the bank. So let's use an analogy. So a lot of us, we all live in homes or apartments, right? And so in order to protect our home or apartment, certainly we all put door locks on. Maybe now we're adding other security systems on so we can surveil remotely and so forth. But we don't roll tanks out in front of our buildings, right, to protect our homes. That would be total overkill, and that would defeat the purpose. So I mention that because so often in these security conversations, people tend to go to extremes. It's like, oh well, we have this one risk. It's like, yes, but the risk of Russia invading your home is pretty low. So don't worry about that. Leave that to somebody else to guard the periphery here. And likewise, so I bring this back home to where the state of the art is in DG solar. And I would say that uh, first of all, it's benefited by being effectively kind of a backwater. In general, we don't have high concentrations of systems available, easily available over the internet here. So that provides some safety because it was not a very attractive target. If you penetrate one of these systems, you're not going to get much. On the other hand, the general level of cybersecurity readiness and awareness is relatively low by that same token. So it's the type of thing that as we're moving to bring all of DG online, that we need to up our game substantially and come up with uniform practices such that if something untoward does happen, we have a way of diagnosing what happened and defining a counter move. And so if you have this sort of a balkanized system where everybody has their own security system, nobody knows what's going on. And so if you actually need help from local police or FBI and so forth, it's hard to get with a non-standardized solution. So where we are today, we have standardized solutions put in place in the form of these protocols that come along with IEEE 1547. They are starting to be rolled out now in California and Hawaii first. They're coming to a jurisdiction near you across all 50 states. And so, I guess I'm happy. I am happy to report that in terms of the over-the-wire security for all these solutions is state of the art. Right. So there's within the security business, transport level security. This is the encryption and so forth that happens over the wire when for transporting packets. All three of these standards are able to support the most current cipher suites, and so you have all the same protections that your bank would have. So that part of the solution is very well secured. Uh, Now, what's going to take work is on these end devices, these gateways, these SCADA systems, and so forth on the plant. That part is not quite so standardized yet, but we're working on that piece, both within the standards community and across all 50 states. The energy commissioners for all 50 states are working together on a DOE project to tackle this problem of how to define what appropriate security is in those regions. So, but it's going to take a process to get this going. And so the very next step in the process is for installers and integrators to get used to applying these networks with their systems, because again, it's going to become an issue for interconnection. In order to get a permission to operate, you're going to have to tune up datacom wise with your local authority, with your local utility.
Let's talk a little bit in the last few minutes we have about how various entities interface with SunSpec and get
Mhm.
involved.
Sure.
I'm particularly interested, of course, for the developer and EPC communities,
Mhm.
but give us some background on that and
Sure.
maybe some examples.
Sure. If I didn't say it at the outset, so SunSpec is a nonprofit trade alliance, and our mission is to grow the size of the pie for distributed energy. That's our headline within our mission statement. Is we want to grow the size of the distributed energy industry because we think it's better for humanity, and we think it's excellent business. Okay, so our tool for doing that is to standardize these data communication protocols and standards and so forth. Now, as a nonprofit, and our specific strategy is that when we publish information, we make it free to the public. So if you're an EPC or an installer, go to sunspec.org. You can get all the specifications. You can see lots of videos, get lots of training and so forth available just by simply by virtue of going to the SunSpec site and just tapping what's there available for free. If you're interested to take a step deeper and start to apply these technologies and learn more, you can join SunSpec. We make it very easy, $3,000 per year for memberships currently. Again, our membership structure is oriented towards manufacturers, but $3,000 a year to join the alliance. We also offer education through UC San Diego and through North Carolina State on distributed energy and specifically on these data communication protocols. So we have 27 academic units, all NABCEP certified, about these new technologies and about cybersecurity that are available to you. The DOE thought that this was a big enough deal that they really wanted to get people ready to do that. And then beyond that, open source software, of course, and I've only talked really about the technical part, but we have this ecosystem of business partners that build these solutions that are all SunSpec compatible. So that's become a thing. So if you want to get involved in one of these networks and participate with the what we think are the best and the brightest, certainly the largest, most influential companies are involved in SunSpec standards, and they're all part of that ecosystem. So start by going to the website, get all the free stuff that you can, get yourself tuned up.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else that we should talk about? Is there anything else coming down the pike that is, so to speak, hot news for SunSpec that you want the community to know about? We're going to do a follow-on
Sure.
on reducing the soft cost for solar, which is also a very important topic that you're working hard on. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to doing that. But what else should our listeners know, and how can our listeners reach you personally?
Sure. Well, I'll leave you with two things in terms of what's, how to further get engaged. So with Sandia National Labs, we run the SunSpec Sandia Cybersecurity Working Group. Been going for 4 years. We have about 800 people, I think, at the last count that are involved in this. It's free. That working group is free. Get involved in that. Next thing that we have coming up through the National Science Foundation, we're working on a project called DER Connect. At UC San Diego, we're building a test bed for all things microgrid and renewable energy. So it has EV chargers, electric vehicles, energy storage, all manner and class of different types of solar systems, all interacting together using these data communication protocols. So be on the lookout for that. And I guess in terms of the what I'll leave you with is please come to sunspec.org. And if you want to contact me personally, very simple to reach, tom@sunspec.org. And we're happy to work with any and all. So please do drop me a line, and I'll be happy to follow up with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom.
All
I
right.
want to remind our listeners that you can find all of this content at cesnrg.com/podcast. We're bringing you 2 interviews of the Solar Podcast every week, including manufacturers like Snake Tray and Enion ES with storage system integration, nonprofits like the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So please check out all of our content at cesnrg.com. And we are also doing a news roundup called the Clean Power Hour with myself and John Weaver on a weekly basis as well. So check that out. Please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. It really helps the industry grow. We are riding a rocket ship for the next 30 to 50 years, as so many industry professionals know. I want to thank Tom Tansy with SunSpec for coming on the show today. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Let's grow solar. And thank you, Tom.